Hi, this is Jack Stanley, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the most unique form of pirated record in the early days. Now, in the early days of recordings, there were a number of companies that pirated and copied. I mean, you can go all the way back to the dawn of the disc. Some of the early zonophones were basically pirated from the Berliner gramophones. And if you go back in the cylinder industry in the age of the brown wax, of course, people were copying and transferring and illegally making their own records from legitimate copies. So this has happened, it's gone on, and in many cases, a copy, a pirated piece, is never of the same quality as the original. However, there is a very rare exception in the early days of recording. Now, in later years, of course, with electrical recording, there are a lot of great pirates made as well and of pretty good quality. But what I'm talking about here is in the first 20 years of the 20th century. This is the label that I highly uh, recommend if you can find it. It's called the Opera Disc. And the Opera Disc record has a very unique history. This is actually a recording of Di Quella Pira by Enrico Caruso. You know, this pirated record was made in 1919, 1920 in Germany. And how did they come about? Actually, the opera disc record came out basically because before World War One, the gramophone company, previously the gramophone typewriter, eventually HMV, had various divisions all over Europe. And during World War One, the German division was more or less severed. And after World War One, when Germany had lost practically everything, the one thing that they did have was an entire storehouse of masters. And they started pressing the opera disc records from legitimate gramophone stampers, actually, also Victor stampers. And they were in business for not the longest amount of time, but for a couple of years until they were forced out of business. But while they were in business, some fantastic pressings were made, and they're quality pressings. In some cases, better than the originals. Case in point, this Di Quella Pira by Caruso. When this was pressed, it's pressed from a stamper that is not transcribed. During the teens, 1915, uh, the Victor recording of Caruso was transcribed because it was no longer good. They had to make a new mother. And Caruso was past the point at that point in his career of uh, of singing that again. It required a very different type of singing that he was no longer doing. But opera discs are phenomenal. I found recordings of Tamagno. I found early recording of Bastini, lots of early Carusos, lots of really quality stuff that was put out by this German company called Opera Disc that used the masters of the Victor and Gramophone Company. Therefore, it's a pirated company making pirate records that were of extremely good quality and in some cases better than the original.